to let people know that this is going on, so we take some political action?
So we do. So these types of meetings are where we express that. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, it's not my job to stand in a pulpit and demean or diminish other government agencies and what they're doing. But
I'll do it.
one of the problems we have in the District of Columbia is we're not a state, right? So we don't have a state's attorney's office, right? So we don't have anybody that's answers to the mayor or to the people, right? Our U.S. attorney is appointed by the President of the United States. And I like him. He was a good line prosecutor. I really like him. But we're not necessarily seeing the frequency of prosecutions that we would like. Now, I will say, Chief Conte started the conversations, and Chief Smith is finishing them. We have seen in the last 2-3 months a much more vigorous prosecution of violent crime than we have in a long time. And I say that because even our juveniles that are in the 16, 17-year range, they're starting to prosecute them as adults now. Knowing that the Office of the Attorney General won't, the U.S. Attorney's Office is using what they call a Title 16 entitlement, where they can, if the crime meets the criteria, bump them up to adult court and try them as adults. Now, there's pros and cons to that both, right? However, when you look at, we're only doing that for the most violent offenses. Like if you're 15 or 16, if you're 16 and 17, you're pulling the trigger and shooting people, we're going to treat you like an adult. That's how you should be treated. Previous to the last couple of months, we hadn't seen that type of prosecution. One of the other things that Chief Smith has been very integral in is getting cases prosecuted in federal court. So federal court cases, they're mandatory minimums, right? So there's a lot, when you go to federal district court, the penalties and the consequences are much higher than if you're in local DC Superior Court. And we see that when cases do go to federal court, we either get one of two things happen. Either people get held accountable and they get some jail time, especially our convicted felons that have pistols and firearms, and or we have people cooperate, right? Meaning people end up telling us about more bad people that help us close more cases. Yes, ma'am.
We've called police several times and they just drive by. Like, there's kids fighting on the street and the police just drive by. They come right away, but they drive by. So why are they not stopping and getting out of the car?
I don't know. I mean, I would have to know those individual circumstances to answer
But it
you
happens
correctly.
many times.
I don't know. I mean, I can't tell you why an officer did or didn't stop because of a certain incident.
But it's happened several times. So what do you do about that?
Call 911 again. Ask them to.
Well, that's silly.
Well, I mean, it depends on the call, ma'am. I mean, we get calls all the time where somebody calls 911 and there's no complaint, there's no callback, and when the officer drives by, there isn't a crime occurring directly. You know what I mean? Like, if they're fighting, but then they stop and they see the police car coming 8 blocks away.
They're just standing there.
Okay, hear me out. Hear me out. This does happen all the time. I answer calls at least twice a day, on my way into work and my way in, out of work, just so my troopers know that I'm out there with them, right? And I can tell you, I answer quite a few calls, and we'll get a call for a drug complaint, but there's no caller that wants to be contacted, and there's no information about what the person looks like. So what are we going to do? Stop everybody in the lot? No, we can't. So we'll drive through, but unless we see something illegal happening, our coppers can't get out and do anything, right? Now, in that instance, you're right. If they're actively fighting, police should stop and they should intervene, 100%. If you have specific dates and times, I'll be glad to look into that. But, I mean, I can't generally answer because that's not a typical scenario. I don't see my officers, rarely do I ever get any complaints about officers not taking police action when
Well, they probably don't follow up with you.
I mean, I talk to probably about 50 or 60 of you every single day, 7 days a week. So maybe they don't. But
Can I just ask, was that associated with the basketball courts in Calhoun Park?
It's been on 20th Street, on Belmont, on Ashmead, on 19th Street.
Okay. I just thought it might be associated.
So I would ask you this, right? I just told you that Dennis is going to provide you guys all our managerial contacts.
Yeah, be sure to give us your email addresses.
So next time you see that happen, don't wait till a meeting now to tell me. Call one of our managers or call me and let me know so that we can act on it right away.
We had last year, Sergeant Hoke. We called him several times and he did not respond.
So Perry Hoke, late last year was injured. He's been out on he's actually on the retirement board because he was critically injured. So if he has an answer, it's because he hasn't been at work. So, yes, sir. In the back.
Thank you, Cutting. 911,
Yes.
it's a problem.
Yes, it is.
suited out,
Right?
one of your folks came by to see what, if anything, was going on, of course, aside from some upset people. There's
So-
nothing to do. So, in terms of how does 911 not functioning impact you folks?
So, for those of you who are not familiar, in the Metropolitan Police Department, we don't answer your calls when you call 911. The Office of Unified Command, which is a separate government agency, takes your 911 calls. All those 911 or 311. And they have a set of what they call call takers who sit at computers and enter the information into a computer. Then gets transferred to OUC, Office of Unified Command dispatchers. The dispatchers have a list of calls, right? All the different various calls for service you can get. Disorderly, and they're all categorized, right? There's hundreds of them. Disorderly, fight in progress, man with a knife, man with a gun, shooting, you name it. Each of them, depending upon the level of seriousness, carry a priority level. So our dispatchers, when those calls come in from the call takers, prioritize them based upon the criteria that the Metropolitan Police Department has set for different types of calls. Meaning,
Sorry, that's,
you gotta go? You good?
no, it's
Okay.
fine. We'll ignore it.
So if a call comes in for a shooting, a call comes in for disorderly, and a call comes in for a traffic complaint, you can imagine the priority that they're given, right? Shooting first, then a disorderly, then a traffic complaint. The problem that happens is when the dispatchers don't get it right, right? And they set something at a priority level that they interpret as being low level, but like you said, it may just be a verbal dispute now, but if it's being described that it's escalating, the person's being threatening, right, that should carry a higher priority level. The problem that affects us as the Metropolitan Police Department is I've never had one when we show up on scene and go, those darn OUC call takers, what took them so long to dispatch that call? On the flip side, I hear, why did it take you MPD so long to get here and we're unhappy with your police service? Right? When in reality, that call was dispatched to us 45 seconds prior to us getting there. Right? We see that so often. Many times we'll have an officer darn near down the street and our folks will look out the window and go, well, I see a cop. Why aren't they here? Because they haven't dispatched it to us yet. So for those of you that know the history of OUC, they've been through several directors over the past couple of years. Right? And everyone that comes in, I guess, thinks they can solve the problem, and then it doesn't, and something bad happens, right? It's not just us. I mean, DC Fire and EMS have the same problem sometimes, right? Where they're getting dispatched, for priority calls for service, for heart attacks, and they're getting sent to the wrong quadrant of the city. At least with us, we're broken down into 7 precincts. We have 7 different dispatchers at any given time that are dedicated strictly to our district, so those calls are coming in just to 3D. But yes, to answer your question, it is a problem. OUC has its own complaint center, and if you Google DC OUC complaints, it comes right to the top of your search list. I suggest if that happens to you, that you follow up with them and make those complaints, because a lot of times we'll hear that from citizens, and then we'll offer them the complaint, hey, look, follow up with OUC, and they never do, because they think telling us will solve the problem, but the reality is 2 government agencies. If I find out that there's an issue with a time to call, I obviously myself will initiate an inquiry, but coming from the folks in the community, I think is more important. Right? I think that really they need to get inundated with that type of complaint system if that's as big of a problem as we think it is.
I understand that you have to remain apolitical, but is there a person in the mayor's office who's in charge of public safety?
Absolutely.
Tell
Absolutely.
us
The Deputy Mayor of Public Safety is Lindsay Apia.
Lindsay?
Lindsay Apia. She was the former Deputy Chief of Staff for Deputy Mayor Geldart. She was appointed and confirmed as the Deputy Mayor of Public Safety after his departure. She is a phenomenal lady. I really like her. She's very smart. She's been in public service her whole life, and she's very responsible, right? So she oversees all public safety in the District of Columbia. Police, fire, EMS, OUC, all that. So she's definitely the person to follow with.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
These kids
Uh-huh.
that are committing these crimes, is it known whether or not they're still attending school or they dropped out?
So attendance rates at school in DC aren't the greatest, right? When you look across the board, we again, shouldn't really be in the world of having to chase kids down that aren't at school, but we enforce truancy, right? It's not a crime, so we can stop a child on the street if he's out during school hours and tell him he needs to go back to school, but if he tells us to go pack sand, we're not gonna use force to take the kid back to school, right? Most of the time, they comply with us, and we take them back, and we take them to their parents. We do the same thing for curfews at nighttime. But again, if a kid says, no, I'm not getting in the police car, we can't take them, right? Because it's not a criminal offense.
Sure. I was just wondering if it's known.
It is,
whether or not
it is.
these
A
are-
lot of the kids committing the crime are not attending school. They may be enrolled in the school, maybe a year or two behind where they should be, but they're not attending like they should be, no. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'll turn to the audience so they can hear. So I'm not trying to put the commander on the spot, but we, in our PSA, which is 303, which is the exact boundaries of Adams Morgan, I'm pretty sure. Since the start of the year, there have been 52 robberies, and there's been 36 of them with a gun. And I asked the commander for closure numbers on that, but I wanted to get further into it. Those are, that's violence that could affect us. I mean, the residents. I draw a little bit of a line between that and like people who come to Adams Morgan to go to a club and wind up shooting at each other afterwards. That's not from here, of course.
So let me tell you something that's going to blow your mind. I'm sure you never thought of this. So he spoke to the numbers here in 303. City, district-wide, all of Freegate, all 8 PSAs, we've had 493 robberies this year. Almost 500 robberies. It's a lot, right? That's about 48% higher than we were last year. It's almost twice as many.
So I just wanted to ask, is there a strategy for attacking this problem?
So hear me out. I'm going to tell you what you probably already know. The 2 highest PSAs relative to robberies are Adams Morgan, right, and U Street Corridor. Why? Because you have agribusiness, Avco, right? Now it's cannabis too, right? Avco businesses all over the damn place in these PSAs, right? The third is probably Columbia Heights Village up on the 14th Street corridor. So high traveled areas, nightlife, bars, liquor, weed, you name it, is a contributing factor to draw people in to commit violence or robberies, especially robberies, against people that have been out drinking, having a good time. Right? Most of our robberies are folks walking. If I had to bet, I'd say 90% of our robberies are people walking back to their cars at the end of the night. Right? Because our criminals are trolling, driving around in cars, waiting to catch somebody in a dark or dim lit area. Or hell, I'll be honest with you, I mean, they'll do it right out in the open, they don't care. Right? They do it so fast and so quick these days that we have officers on U Street that are out on foot during nighttime hours. They'll run half a block to try to stop it, and they're gone by the time they can get to them. So, I mean, like I said, over the last 30 days, we've seen a significant decrease. But yeah, no, that's definitely something that we're worried about. Even as of about 2 weeks ago, I testified on a ABRA hearing for moratorium on the 9th Street corridor, right at 9th U Street, to be not in favor of issuing more ABRA licenses. Because we got enough. Right? And I got folks who live down in the Westminster community, and just like you, are inundated by after-hour club goers, right? Whether it be the people committing the robberies, or people hanging outside their house 3 or 4, 5, 6 in the morning, drinking or being loud or throwing giant pizza slices over at your door or whatever. I say that, but people do dumb stuff when they're out drinking, right? I don't think we really need more of those establishments. I'm all about capitalism, make your money, but when's enough, right? So I think that's something that you guys do well in staying on top of that, but I think the bid here in Adams Morgan needs to really bear down and decide whether we want more or control what we got a little better.
Well, if I can, I want to jump on that a little bit.
Okay.
So this kind of points out why it was so important for us to renew the moratorium that we have on tavern licenses in the neighborhood. And, as many restaurants, ABC restaurants can come, as confined a space. That we don't try to limit that. We think that overall, restaurants hopefully will be some service to the neighborhood or maybe tourists or whatever. But, a tavern is going to want to be open until all the late hours. And those are the hours that the commander was pointing out. That's when these robberies occur, and that brings violence to our neighborhood. So, you know, the KCA was there, 171 people signed our petition. Most of them were not actually KCA members. That was really great. But the ANC voted 8-0 to allow 9 more taverns, to increase the number from 16 to 25. So we kicked their ass, excuse me, you know, but we did by getting good testimony and having the facts on our side. So it was just, it's a shame. It really is a shame that public servants don't get it, don't listen to their constituents. So that's me on my pulpit.
So I'll use this as an example. I live in a planned community on Calvert County, Maryland, about an hour from here. I used to live in the city, but I live out there now. I got probably about 75 homes in my neighborhood, and I was tired of the homeowners association coming up with these cockamamie rules about what we can and can't do in our neighborhood. And we all have like 3 or more acres. And it's like, we didn't move down here to be told we can't have this or that. So they said, well, all right, well, if you don't like it, run for the board. So I did. I became the HOA president by default. Now I'm stuck. Right? However, I got a bunch of guys and gals on the board that are like minds, and guess what? We've changed things, right? Now, I say that to say, I don't think anybody in here is running for an ANC or council person, right? But they probably, it'd be great if you guys did, right? And I'm not putting that weight on your shoulders. I'm just saying, a lot of the folks that we put into office, whether it be ANCs or council or police chief or whoever, right, are folks that never sat in a room like this and listened to you or talked to you or shared the same views or concerns. I'll tell you this, the reason people's fear has increased in the city is the proximity to pain has changed. When somebody gets robbed over there, right, it's different, right? If somebody's car gets stolen and put up on blocks over there in that neighborhood, I'm not really worried about it. But when it happens here, in my neighborhood, in my house, to my car, to my neighbor, to my friend, to my partner, that's personal, right? And we're seeing now that that level of, especially the violent crime robberies and carjackings, these kids are preying on neighborhoods. Not just the tertiary 18th Street and U Street. They know that's where we're going to be because those are busy areas. So they go hunt in these other areas. And by them being mobile and stolen cars, they've got the freedom to go everywhere. You know? So that's one of the things that really, when I talked about, while we're bearing down on these felony vehicles, that's why. So, yes, sir.
So, just to your point, I've been living here almost 30 years.
Yeah.
I got robbed at gunpoint really fast, just coming home. It was a Sunday night, it was a little bit later than I'm out, it was 12 o'clock.
Sure.
But, fortunately I wasn't hurt. But what I wanted to say was, I really appreciate not just your being here today, but the way that you're explaining things that I didn't understand how they work, in language that I can understand. So I just wanted to say I really appreciate the way that you're handling the meeting, the way you're giving us information.
Thank you.
It's really
So I'd be remiss to tell you that my executive leadership program is through the University of Chicago, and I have to travel out there Sunday for a week as part of this graduate level program. We have a guest speaker on the Zoom. He's a former deputy commissioner of New York City Police Department. The topic today is recidivism and locking up the same people over and over. Right? So this cohort I'm in, and I don't mean to bore you with this, it's 25 leaders, commanders of other major law enforcement agencies. They're all district commanders, all from similar geographic areas like the 3rd District. They specifically picked us all as part of a bigger study. And I can tell you, whether it's LA, New York, New Orleans, Cleveland, we're all seeing the same problem. We're seeing the same Kia challenge. We're seeing the same increase in violent crime with our juveniles. We're seeing the same behavioral issues in the club zone areas. I mean, it really is kind of eerie to sit in a room with 25 other commanders from other places across the country and have the almost identical problems where I could drop any of them into my district and they would know how to handle it because it's the same problem, right? So, yes, sir.
Thanks for being here. I live down near the 7-Eleven.
Okay.
And it used to be that we would see park police, Secret Service patrols, and district police regularly. And that presence was good. In the last 2 years, there's been very little presence, virtually none of Secret Service, none of Park Police, so you guys are
I'll tell you why.
on your own.
I'll tell you
so-
why, and it's kind of our fault. So Chief Conti, when he took over, was a big proponent of everybody do their part, right? So he went out and solicited all these other agencies to do their part, meaning don't just go sit and park somewhere and wait for something to happen. If you're operating within our city, go do something, go find work. So we asked the Secret Service Patrol Division and the Park Police to start being more mobile, right? Because although they have certain areas they're responsible for, they have jurisdiction when they're moving about between locations. So we kind of gave them the authority to kind of go do some police work, right? And that has made them much more mobile, and they're not sitting guarding corners anymore. I hate to say that. So we've kind of created, and it's helpful in aspects because Park Police chases cars. So when we have a felony vehicle that we might not chase, Park Police will get behind that car and chase it. They have a whole set of different rules, right? They're a federal entity. Secret Service, I mean, up here, quite often, they catch people when we, because not only do we ask them to do police work, but we send them all our lookouts for all our robberies. We actually program the radios where they can listen to our radio now. So it's very often that they'll actually intervene in some of our after crimes. I think just day before yesterday, Secret Service stopped a guy for a burglary like 5 minutes after up in Mount Pleasant, just because they were out riding around instead of sitting still. So, but if I see a couple, I'll ask them to go back and sit. Well, I'll be honest, the 7-Eleven, I mean, that's a problem too, right? It gets robbed like once, every 3 months. We just had the young lady, a suspect went in, we have a lead in the case, so we think we're going to close it, but robbed her and then put her in the cooler, like locked her in the freezer. Fortunately, somebody came in to get something and heard her banging on the door and let her out, but, I mean, she didn't put up a fight, she gave her everything in the till, and he said, okay, thank you very much for the money, now go get in the freezer. Who does that? Yeah. Anybody else? Starting to get hot in here, I know. Yes, sir, you're back.
Yes, one more thing. You probably know the Street Scott did it yet. Street's grocery store right down the street here.
Yeah.
And the same visit, when you're kind enough to come visit on the other side of the street, we went over there. I said, so they're going right through the glass. He did. What are they looking for? I mean, how do you explain this?
I can't.
Again, and again,
Yeah.
the bottle shop on 18th Street, that's the second or third time they've been here.
So, the burglaries, to be honest with you, they don't carry a lot of priority at the prosecutorial level, right? The same reason you see major retailers in Los Angeles completely abandoning the city because they're tired of loss prevention, losing, product over and over and over and over and over. And the police really, if we do catch somebody, what happens to them? They get right back down the street, right? I'm not saying that dictates whether we go after people. I mean, we'll pursue justice in the form of arrest all day long, right? But it's after that really means, what's going to happen, to that community, right? If we just let those people back out, the folks that committed the armed robberies here, back in the beginning of the year, they're still held. They're going to trial, right? We had to fight to get those guys to be held in jail. They wanted to release them with GPS. When you commit that much crime, what makes you think they're not going to cut the GPS off, or even better yet, go commit crime with the GPS on? Like, I mean, so.
Thank you for arresting those guys.
So when earlier you were talking about the dysfunction, you were being very polite to the other DC agencies and so forth. But associated with Bill in the back there, who just asked that question about the earlier robberies and then streets being hit again. So I tried to get in a position where I could help other people write a community impact statement. And I went to a 3D CAC, Citizens Advisory Council meeting. Commander was out of town. But people were there from the prosecutor's office. And I talked to the woman who was in charge of doing that. And she said, oh, I'll call you Monday. And her assistant called me and basically said, oh, we'll get back to you later in the week. And then nothing. So here I am, ready to go out and go to the different businesses who got hit and say, this is how it affected us. And maybe some KCA members would be willing to step forward and say, we were scared of what was going on in our neighborhood.
So I piggyback off that to say that lackluster response It's not indicative just of you at that time. I made such noise that she's no longer our community prosecutor. So they moved on and brought in a new community prosecutor, who's supposed to be coming hopefully to the CAC meeting next week. So let's hope for better
Do
things.
you, just, this is not, I know it's not your exact
Yeah.
job, but would a community impact statement
So
still be
community impact,
useful?
so community impact statements are useful, but you gotta remember, they're only useful at sentencing,
Yeah.
right? So if the U.S. Attorney's Office decides, hey, these guys got locked up for doing 9 commercial armed robberies and 20 burglaries, but we're gonna let them plead to a global plea of 2 burglaries and give them 2-year sentences, it's never gonna hit, you're never gonna get that opportunity until the day of sentencing, when they've already pled them down to, what they're giving them. Now, yes, the community impact statement and the victim impact statements are made to force the judge to sit there and listen to the community sentiment prior to, rendering that final decision. I think I've seen them be helpful. I've watched judges' faces turn from one side to the other because of community impact statements or victim impact statements. A lot of times it's some of the more serious cases like your murders, your homicides, your shootings. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tool. So I mean, I'd venture to say it can't hurt trying. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about what's happening in terms of staffing levels for the third?
Absolutely. So currently, the department sits at about 3,450 or so, give or take, variance of maybe 10 officers in the police department. Sworn and professional staff, meaning civilian members, we're up around 4,000. However, we are funded for 4,000 sworn police officers. So we're about 500 to 600 people short than where we were, this time a couple of years ago. When you look at the staffing of the 3rd district, I mentioned earlier that so let's put it in perspective. We have 7 police precincts. Whoever decided to make maps between wards and precincts, I think they were drinking that night because they're different, right? But we go by precincts or stations. We have 7 of them. We have the smallest geographic footprint of all of them, right? However, we are the most densely populated, right? Where people live and want to work and play within this geographic space than any of the other 6 districts. So I guess that's a good thing, right? However, we are the shortest staffed out of all 7 districts. So when you look at historically how districts were staffed by the chief and the executive staff, it was based on calls for service, population, geographic size, because the theory of it's more geographic space, then you have to have more officers. However, I don't think that Rock Creek Park needs that much patrol comparatively to Columbia Heights Village and Adams, right? So there are definitely conversations that I've had with the chief of police as well as other members of the executive staff about redistricting personnel, right? So every so many years, our districts, we sit down, we look at crime, our crime analysts and all of our executive staff, command staff, we sit in a big room and we talk about boundaries of PSAs and boundaries of districts and so forth. I don't ever think we're going to lose geographic space because we're already the smallest one. I don't think we're going to gain a whole lot, but I think out of those conversations, we're going to get a bump in personnel because our call volume over the last 5 to 10 years has increased significantly. Our population has increased, and with that comes, again, what I said earlier, is the opportunities for more victims of crime. When you look at the people we do arrest for armed robberies and carjackings, I'd say about 6% of them are from the 3rd district, right? The majority of folks we arrest, for whatever reason, are from other parts of the city or even not the city at all, right? I was in this executive leadership program a couple months back. We were talking about recidivist crime, and somebody brought up and said, "Man, Commander, it sounds like your district's the devil's playground." I went, "Dude, I hate hearing that, but that's kind of a good description of what it is, right? Others who want to commit crime come to 3D because 1, they've got that nightlife that attracts them. It's fun, and then at the end of the night, we get to go create havoc and go back to our, wherever we came from after, we commit crime somewhere else." A lot of these young men commit carjackings. I'm going to tell you, come down here and party, and then when it's time to go home, instead of getting an Uber like you and I would do responsibly, just go take somebody's car. This is the way it happens, right? We'll recover the car on the other side of the city an hour later. So, yes, sir.
I was wondering whether you had any impression on the effect that eliminating the reimbursable police detail down on 18th on the weekends has had on the neighborhood.
So,
that happened during
It did. It happened because of COVID, and probably rightfully so, right? COVID shut down the type of behavior on 18th Street that probably didn't warrant the expenditures that came with, right? I think there's a time and a place for outside employment for officers. However, in my 25 years, I have never seen the amount of overtime that we're throwing at our officers than we are now, right? Meaning, because we're short-staffed and we have all these responsibilities to still cover, remember, we're covering every dignitary that comes into the city, every POTUS movement, you know, every time the president moves, or the vice president moves, every First Amendment demonstration. I mean, we're damn near covering, excuse my language, you know, birthday parties and parks. I mean, like, you name it, we're getting called to go cover these different events all the time. And we don't have enough on-duty personnel any given day of the week to cover all that stuff, plus patrol districts and staff initiatives like I talked about earlier. So we have to force our officers to work a lot of overtime. The problem that the reimbursement detail creates is that's going to come to a priority much less than mandatory overtime that we have to make our officers work. So I can promise you, no cop's going to want to work a 10-hour shift. They get forced to work 8 more hours of mandatory overtime for a protection detail, and then go work in 18th Street afterwards, right? Like in fact, we have civil liberty laws that don't allow them to work more than 18 hours. So sometimes we have to just send people home, even though we still need them. So those reimbursable details have proven difficult to staff. The ones that are like daytime at the Whole Foods, you know, during 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., I mean, we can staff those because people want to work those hours. They don't want to go work after they work a full shift to go stay on 18th Street and have to fight people at nighttime, right? So even if the bid tomorrow is to say, hey, we changed course, we're going to bring back our reimbursable detail, we want 20 cops up here every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night, we probably don't have the people that would staff that. We might get a couple, but you won't see what you saw before. Not until we get our staffing levels 400 or 500 more than we are. Yes, sir. You should have sat up front.
The well-publicized lootings of CVSs around the city, has there been a resolution in terms of who is doing this and where all this stuff goes?
You're talking about the robberies, the burglaries, or the theft, the mob thefts of the CVSs. So, again, that goes back to what I was talking about in LA. Shoplifting is not a high priority crime. Even when you start aggregating the amount of stuff that's thrown out of these places, it doesn't rise to the level that interests prosecutors to go hard and heavy on people, right? There's 2 different groups of folks that are exploiting the stores, right? There's the what I call the half homeless, young man that just wants to steal to facilitate his bad habits, and then there's the organized crew of 4 or 5 young men masked up that run into these stores and steal high-end goods. I mean, Fleet Feet got hit, right, where they stole thousands of dollars of stuff in a matter of about 40 seconds. You get these folks going to the Lululemon stores, right? They're taking everything they can off the racks very quickly, right? Those folks, when we can catch them, absolutely prosecute them. Just recently, I'd say within the last 2 months, we made some arrests up in Foggy Bottom of a group of organized young men, all in their early 20s, that were doing the CVS robberies, and I think they linked them to like 30 different cases. So yeah, they're being prosecuted, but the average run-of-the-mill, grab some stuff and go, unfortunately has led to us now having to ask somebody to get toothpaste from behind the locked counter. And I gotta stand there for 10 minutes to try to get some toothpaste, right? Like, that doesn't seem fair. But I mean, that's, the hotel I'm staying at in Chicago is the same one I stayed at last time. I went to the CVS right at the, like 20 yards away from my hotel, and I had to stand there again for 20 minutes to get toothpaste and the Ranger out of the locked cabinet, so it's happening everywhere.
Well, I think we've come to a good point to end this section of the meeting, because we've got a couple of other things we need to do that are quite important. Hope you'll stay.
Well, folks, thank you very much for your
Thank you.